Hey everybody, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank you for watching this video. And remember that this channel doesn't do Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital courses down below. And every single dollar that we get from the products you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help out this channel and Mammoth Interactive is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Get thousands of hours and hundreds of courses for a low price down below. We have a monthly option and a yearly option. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the video.
In this lecture, we are getting started with the Google Actions console. So let's discuss what is this console. You can access the console by going to the URL console.actions.google.com, and all you need is a Google account to get started. Actions on Google is the platform for developers to extend the Google Assistant. You can develop actions to engage users on Google Home, Pixel, and other surfaces where the Google Assistant is available. So you could build out an action, for example, so that users can turn on a light bulb via the Google Assistant. The user would say, "Hey Google, turn off the light bulb," and then your action would be able to handle that request. So we're going to create a new project to represent our action. You can check out the documentation, sample code, API reference, and get support for actions on Google. The documentation is at Google Developers, developers.google.com/assistant. Here we have a lot of information of what we can do, how we can integrate with the Google Assistant. There are ways to build, ways to extend your mobile app, ways to build conversations, enhance your web presence, connect to smart home devices, and also some examples. You can also explore all of the actions that are available, for example, art and lifestyle. You can use Google search, get info about TV programs, facts about film directors, get style recommendations, check horoscopes, connect with religion, find beauty services, get decor and DIY ideas, find a date, find local events, read quotes, and more. There's also business and finance to check your investment portfolio, check financial markets, get information about businesses and organizations, find financial services, check account balances, find a job, test your bot, manage investments, track your business performance, find a credit card, manage payments, check your credit score, track expenses, file taxes, check business news, play business podcasts, check product prices, and more. Under communication and social, you can make a phone call, manage messages, make video calls, manage contacts, manage emails, call for help, chat with a bot, find events, check social media, find friends and family, meet new people, share on social media, and more. For education and reference, you can get information about history and events. You can convert units, get information about people, use Translate, get information about technology, learn a language, learn skills, develop your vocabulary. In this lecture, we are discussing how does a conversational action work with the Google Assistant. And you can read more about this by going to the documentation for the Google Assistant for developers, which is at developers.google.com/assistant. So, a conversational action. A conversational action extends the functionality of the Google Assistant. So we as developers can create custom experiences or conversations that our users can use on the assistant. In a conversation, the conversational action will handle requests from the assistant and return responses with audio and visual components. So if a user asks, "Hey, open the app and play music from the app," then the conversational action will handle that request. Conversational actions can also connect to external services before returning a response. For example, if your user is asking, "How many bikes are available to rent today from this company?" then the conversational action can connect to the external service, being the company or Google, perhaps, to add that extra logic before it can return a response. One example is users can invoke our conversational action to get a response from an external fulfillment service if they want to look up information or get a recommendation or make a payment. So a user will say something like, okay, Google, let's talk to an app. And then the assistant is going to be the third party or middle party that is allowing you to connect with the app hands-free. Some use cases for conversational actions. Typically, a conversational action will fall into one of three categories. An action that can be accomplished that people can easily answer, like what time is my flight? A quick but useful action, such as finding out what time is it? An action that is better for voice, that you'd want to do hands-free, like start a timer or set an alarm. A conversational action uses your user to interact with the assistant. So behind the scenes, the conversational action has to interpret the voice and be able to understand what the user is asking. So there's natural language processing that's happening. A conversational action begins when the user wants it to begin and will continue until the user exits or the action figures out that it's the end, because the user is likely not saying anything else. During the conversation, user inputs are converted from speech to text behind the scenes and transformed into a JSON request. So this JSON request contains what the user wants to do, like turn on a light bulb. That will be converted from just words spoken to a JSON request. Then the request is sent to conversation fulfillment. Conversation fulfillment parses the user's query into data, processes the data, and returns a webhook JSON response to the assistant. The assistant will then process and present the response to the user. So the conversation input could be turn on a light bulb. Then that will be processed and returned as a webhook response. The response is then used by the assistant to present the response to the user, such as light bulb turned on. Right, so in this way, we can use the natural language processing that's available for us by the Google Assistant for developers. Right, so feel free to read more here at Google Developers. Coming up next, we're going to build an action together. So we're going to build an action in our Google Actions console. Right, and then we'll continue on from there. So part of the Google Assistant are intents and invocation, because when a user wants to do something, they have to have an intent. That's their intent, and they have to invoke their intent when they want to engage with an action. So if they want to turn on a light bulb, they have to say that. There are explicit invocations and implicit invocations. So sometimes the invocations are explicit, like, hey Google, talk to the app, or implicit versus, hey Google, book an appointment to fix my bike. So in this case, the assistant would have to figure out which app to use. Invocation phrases are used by the assistant to figure out what to do, such as, what time is it, or what's the current price of gold? The Google Assistant will take that phrase and recognize it to figure out what the user wants to do. Right, so first you have the intent and invocation of the action, then you have to build a fulfillment. So the fulfillment actually allows you to perform the action. So if the user wants to turn on a light bulb, your fulfillment has to turn on the light bulb and possibly say to the user back, okay, I turned it on. Right, so that is an overview of how a conversational action works, how your user converses with the Google Assistant or talks to the Google Assistant in order to fulfill a task. So join me coming up in the next lecture. We're going to build an action on the Google Actions console so we can start experimenting with developing for the Google Assistant. Hello everyone, in this lecture we are getting started with the Google Developer Console. Our first step is going to be to build an Actions project at the console. So join me at the URL console.actions.google.com. Here we are at Actions on Google, a platform for developers to extend the Google Assistant. You can join this emerging ecosystem by developing actions to engage users on Google Home, Pixels, and other surfaces where Google Assistant is available. You can reference the documentation for integrating with Google Assistant. Here we have different ways to build and some suggestions for projects and games and connecting smart home devices. We also have sample code that you can visit as well. Some samples on GitHub for integrating with Google Assistant. We have an API reference as well where you can read exactly what different tools mean, and you can visit support where you can ask questions about your project. Okay, our step is going to be to create a new project or a new Actions project. So we click this button, New Project, and then we can enter in a name for the project, such as My Home Project, and choose your language and your country or region. Then hit Create Project. You'll be prompted to select the kind of action. So you have different categories like Smart Home to let users control your smart home devices with Google Assistant and the Google Home app. Food ordering to integrate your food ordering flow with Google Search, Maps, and Google Assistant. Game to build a trivia game or a multiplayer gaming experience. Custom or storytelling to build narratives. And education, build immersive educational experiences. So for our course, we are learning all about the smart home. So select smart home as the kind of action. This is the category for the type of experience we want to build for the Google Assistant. Then you can hit Start Building and wait a moment for the project to be created specifically for the smart home type. Then you'll be redirected to a different URL, still at console.actions.google.com, but this time you're actually at your project. So here you can manage your actions. We have some steps naming our smart home action and set up account linking, which we can do to complete the creation of the action, and we'll do that shortly. First, let's take a look at what else is available on our project page. So once you create a project, the project will have a project page, and you can go to Overview to see the overview of the project. So first you have to do your quick setup, which we will do. Then you will build your action, and you can test it out in the simulator. And then you can get ready for deployment. And finally, you can have a release. Right? So these are the steps in general for managing a new smart home project. You also have a Develop tab where you can get started with development of the project, a Test tab where you can run tests using a simulator, a Deploy tab. Here you can get started with deploying your project, and an Analytics tab where you can view analytics for your action. How many times has it been used, for example? Alright, so that does it for now. We have built a new Actions project on the Google Developer Console. Join me in the next lecture where we will continue our project. In this lecture, we are getting started with Firebase and the Firebase command line interface, which we're going to use heavily in our project. So let's start off with talking about what is Firebase. Firebase is a Google-backed application development software. It enables you to build iOS, Android, and web apps. Firebase has a lot of other features as well, like database, hosting, cloud functions, and more. Firebase provides tools for tracking analytics, reporting app crashes, creating marketing experience, and others that I've mentioned. To learn more about Firebase, go to firebase.google.com. Here you can check out the documentation and use cases for Firebase. Firebase is very popular for building, releasing and monitoring, as well as engaging. So companies large and small use Firebase as well as extensions. You can integrate Firebase with tools like Google Ads, the Play Store, BigQuery, and more. You can use Google Cloud and Firebase as well, because Firebase projects are backed by Google Cloud. Firebase is used by companies like the New York Times, Lyft, Duolingo, and more. Some common use cases you can check out at the Firebase documentation. Firebase is easy to integrate on iOS, Android, and the web. There's a lot of documentation and software development kits that help you build your projects like your Android app, iOS app, your website, your C++ game or your Unity game, and then integrate Firebase into it. You can do actions like authenticate users. So when someone wants to sign up to your website, you can check out different languages for doing that in. You can read and write in real time to the database, so you can add a new user to the database. You can subscribe a user to a notification topic. Okay, for example, if they want to subscribe to a news topic. You can log a custom analytics event, like logging a sharing image event. You can also save an image to cloud storage. So Firebase enables you to store your data via Firebase storage, right? And you can view the documentation to read more about what you can do for build, release, monitoring, and engaging. For example, for build, you can build an app. You can spin up the backend without managing the server. You can scale to support millions of users with Firebase databases, machine learning infrastructure, hosting and storage, and cloud functions. So in our project, we're going to use Firebase as our database to store our data. We'll also use Firebase for hosting, so we can access our website via the web, thanks to Firebase hosting. We're also going to use Firebase cloud functions, which allow you to interact and handle requests and responses. You can also use Firebase for release and monitoring, so you can improve your app quality. You can simplify testing, triaging, and troubleshooting. You can roll out features and monitor them. You can also fix stability and performance issues and see where is your stability or performance lacking. You can also use Firebase for engagement. You can boost user engagement with Firebase Analytics, A/B testing, and messaging campaigns. You can get insights into your users with data analysis. You can run experiments to test your ideas for engagement, and you can customize your app for user segmentation. So there's a lot you can do with Firebase. It's quite an exciting and powerful tool and very popular, especially since it is backed by Google. So that is Firebase. Coming up, we're going to discuss what is the Firebase command line interface. In this lecture, we are discussing what is the Firebase command line interface, also called CLI for short. The Firebase command line interface allows you to manage, view, and deploy your Firebase projects. So we're going to use the command line interface to manage our Firebase project. Like you can instantiate or create a new Firebase project. You can create a database. You can set up hosting. You can upload files to be hosted. You can check your database. So you can interact with Firebase via the CLI, the command line. So we are going to be working with the terminal or command line on our computers. This is a default app that's built into your computer, and via that terminal or command line, you can install and use the Firebase command line interface. So it just means it's a way to interact with Firebase or interface with Firebase via the command line. So we will have a prerequisite section all about how to work with the command line in general, because then we're going to be using the command line in order to use the Firebase command line interface. So as a developer, you have to know how to use the command line. to manage your projects and also to use command line interfaces like Firebase CLI. So instead of having to go to the website to use Firebase, we can interact with Firebase via our command line. It's going to make your interactions with Firebase and your development a lot faster. You can perform tasks like real-time database management from your command line. As well, you can deploy and manage Firebase Cloud Functions via the command line, and we're going to be doing this in our project. The Firebase command line is built on Node.js, so that's why you have to have Node.js and npm installed on your computer. And this is free to install. It's free to use Node.js and Firebase CLI. But in order to work with the Firebase CLI, you have to have Node installed. You can read more at firebase.google.com/docs/CLI. This is the Firebase documentation and the section on the command line interface. This provides information for how to set up or update the CLI. We're going to be going through this together. So first you have to set up a Firebase project, then you can start using the Firebase CLI. We're going to install it together and then use it throughout our project. So join me in the next lecture where we'll continue the course. In this lecture, we are discussing what are Firebase Cloud Functions, because we're going to be using Firebase Cloud Functions heavily in our project. Cloud Functions for Firebase is a serverless framework that lets you automatically run backend code in response to events triggered by Firebase and HTTPS requests. So if a user wants to trigger an event like turn on a light bulb, you can automatically run a response with Cloud Functions. JavaScript or TypeScript code is stored in the Google Cloud and runs in a managed environment. You don't have to manage or scale your own server because Firebase is handling that for you. To read more, go to firebase.google.com/docs/functions. This is the Firebase documentation, and there's a section on Cloud Functions for Firebase. So some key capabilities of Cloud Functions. You can integrate the Firebase platform. So the functions can respond to events triggered by Firebase and Google Cloud features, like authentication. When a user wants to log in, you can authenticate them to make sure they put in the correct credentials, as well as cloud storage triggers and more. You can integrate across Firebase features with the Admin Software Development Kit and Cloud Functions. You can also integrate with third-party services with your own webhooks, which is what we'll be doing in our project. We're going to be writing webhooks. Cloud Functions minimize the amount of code you have to write, so it's easier to use Firebase and Google Cloud in your function. There's zero maintenance. You just have to deploy your code to the servers with one command from the command line. After that, Firebase will automatically scale up the computing resources to match how many users you have. You don't have to worry about credentials, server configuration, provisioning new servers, or decommissioning old servers. As well, with Cloud Functions, your logic is private and secure. The Cloud Functions are fully insulated from the client, so you don't have to worry about any tampering on the client side. Right? So you also don't have to worry about reverse engineering from your clients of your code. So how do Cloud Functions work? Well, when you write and deploy a function, Google's servers will begin to manage the function. You can call the function with an HTTP request or have a background function where Google's servers will listen for events and run the function when it's triggered. As the load increases or decreases, Google will respond by scaling the number of virtual server instances that are needed to run your function. Each function runs in isolation in its own environment with its own configuration. So the life cycle looks like this. You write the code for a new function and define when should this function execute. When you deploy the function, the Firebase command line interface creates an archive of the function code, which is uploaded to the Google Cloud storage bucket in your Firebase project. Cloud Build retrieves the function code and builds the function source. and you can view the build logs in the Google Cloud Console. The container image for the functions code is uploaded to a private container registry in your project, and your new function can be used. When an event matches the function's conditions, the code of the function is called. So when a user wants to turn on a toaster, well, that is the event that will trigger the function toaster should turn on, or turn on toaster. So the function will only be called when its event or its conditions are met. If the function is busy with many events, Google creates more instances to handle the work faster. If you have few events, then the instances are cleaned up. When you update the function, then instances of the old versions are cleaned up along with the build artifacts in cloud storage and container registry, so you can update your functions with new versions. When you delete the function, all instances and zip archives are cleaned up, as well as the build artifacts. The connection between the function and the event provider is removed, so the function is gone. It will no longer be called. You can also listen for events with background function, so Google can listen for when a function should be triggered based on background events or conditions. Like if the weather becomes sunny, then you should turn on some music. The function would be the music starts playing. The event is that it suddenly or eventually becomes sunny outside. You can also call functions directly with an HTTP request or a call from your client. So this would be, for example, if your app user wants to rent an apartment, then they could call your app to perform that request for the renting. And then you could call the function that would handle that event. So there are many ways that functions can be triggered. So to implement a cloud function, first you have to install the Firebase command line interface, which we will do together, and then initialize cloud functions in your Firebase project. Then you write your functions in JavaScript or TypeScript to handle events from Firebase services, Google Cloud services, or similar. So you write the functionality that you want to handle. Then you can test your functions, deploy, and monitoring. So in order to use cloud functions, you do have to have a billing account, which is free to have, and it will only start charging you if you go above the limits, which are quite large. So for learning and for testing purposes, in our project, we will need the billing account to actually use cloud functions, but we won't be using enough to actually be billed. So you have to enable billing and then deploy your functions with the Firebase command line interface. Then your functions will be ready to use, and you can search through the Firebase console to see what happens every time you call the function. And you can verify that your functions are working as expected. Right, so that is an introduction to cloud functions. You can read more about what you can do with cloud functions as well. With cloud functions, you have access to Firebase and Google Cloud events, as well as scalable computing power. Some examples are to notify users, to perform database maintenance, to execute intensive tasks in the cloud instead of using all your app resources, and to integrate third-party services and APIs. You can call functions directly or trigger background functions, and later in this course we'll learn how to write functions and how to test functions. So join me coming up in the next lecture. We're going to get started with the Firebase command line interface, and then later using cloud functions.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this course. If you want to watch the rest of the course, the link is down below. Not only will you get the access to this course, but you'll get access to a lot of other courses in a huge bundle, and it's on sale today. So buy it before the sale ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.